Wow, that's really huge. Thank you for that introduction. Now, so let's delve straight into it. Okay, so can you tell me what you think about the general state of venture funding in Africa in 2021? So, what do you think are the high points, the impressive aspects of them, the not so impressive aspects, and what you think we could do better?
Sure. Well, obviously quite a few things. The first thing is the overall number. It's quite big, and that's grown a lot. So we are at more than $4.3 billion of funding raised by startups in Africa in 2021, and that represents more than 2.5 times the amount raised in 2020. So if you want, it's actually more than what was raised by startups in Africa in 2020, 2019, and 2018 combined,
Wow.
which is quite a strong testimonial of how big the year and how I would say how much of a transition year this has been for the ecosystem. All this despite obviously the global COVID crisis. Some other interesting points there. Funding still goes to the same four large markets in vast majority. So Nigeria, South Africa, Egypt, and Kenya, more than 80%. What's interesting is that despite the fact that there are a couple of very, very large deals, I think I don't know how many 100 million plus deals we got, but these five or six throughout the year. What's interesting is that you still have you basically have a lot more smaller deals as well. So you basically have around one, you have around 820 deals over $100,000 in 2021. So that's really the great news, and this forms really a strong pyramid where like the vast majority are pre-seed and seed deals. And so that's very, very, very positive for the future. Hopefully, a lot of the startups will be able to go on and scale and raise Series A, Series B, and so on in the coming years. So that's pretty great. In the lesser good news, most of this funding goes mainly to men. So you have 82% of this total funding that has been raised by startup led by
Men.
co-founders, or either one man only, or several male only co-founders. So yeah, that's definitely not great, not balanced at all. You have not a single female only founded startup that raised more than $6 million last year. So there are some startups with a female CEO, like for instance Grow Intelligence, or some others that have gone raised significant funding. But in these cases, you always have like male co-founders. So that's definitely not a good stat. It's not specific to Africa, but it's definitely something that needs to change. And yeah, I'm not going to say I hope it will change. I'm saying we need to change this. We all need to play a role.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, definitely. Yeah, so okay, in 2019, Africa was able to realize 1.3 billion in venture funding. In 2020, I think it was 1.7 billion. That's a very minute raise. But 2021, we had 4.3, just like you mentioned. So, how would we say the pandemic affected venture funding in Africa, and how well would we say that we rebounded from that loss?
Clearly, it has impacted the year 2020. As you said, 2019 was around 1.3, 2020 was 1.7. The growth has not been that much year on year in 2020, and it should have been. The trajectory was much higher before that. So definitely it should have been higher. Probably without the pandemic, the total funding in 2020 should have been way above to meet 2 billion. Somewhere between 2 and 3. So the fact that you have this big jump in 2021 is also, a consequence of some investments planned for 2020 that have been postponed to 2021.
Yes.
That I think is an important aspect of the pandemic. Now, what the pandemic has shown as well is that the ecosystem is quite resilient to crisis for a number of reasons. But one of them is that most of the startups, not all, that have raised funding last year are really solving big problems, important problems that are affecting millions of people. So, when your startup provides food, healthcare, education, access to energy, access to payments to people, these things are not going away. Even if there is a crisis, even if there is a pandemic, these things are still there. Logistics, transportation, agriculture, healthcare, education, access to energy, and access to finance. This is not going anywhere. So I think that is also why the ecosystem has been very, very resilient. And now the question is, will 2022 be as big or bigger? Will the trend continue? The early signs are good. For not only because there has been a number of deals already signed in January and so on, but also because there has been a number of funds that have been closed at the end of last year, meaning that this fund will be deployed in 2022 and the coming years. So, potential on paper, there's quite a bit of money to be deployed this year. So that's
Wow. Well, thank you very much for that. So let's look at funding in Africa through the prism of what obtains globally. Okay. So so in Africa, it's been touted to be the next big deal, in tech, with huge talents, with a very large market, and every other thing that that makes it potentially ripe for tech. But look at global funding. Okay, there were 621 billion was raised by tech startups the world over in last year. Only 4.3 came to Africa. Okay, so more than 1,500 funding rounds. We are 100 million and above. I think only one came to Africa, which is cheaper cash, I believe. Yeah, so and then if you look at Q4 results, okay, Asia had 52.6 billion, the US got 22.8 billion, Europe got 2.1 billion, Latin America got 4 billion, Africa got less than 1 billion in Q4. So, if you consider these huge disparities, what do you think are the reasons why?
So, first of all, it's important to put, to compare apples with apples. Yes, the absolute value in Africa is small, especially if you compare it with the size of the continent, the population of the continent, and so on. But what's interesting is the growth, right? It's how this is evolving year on year. There's just a certain amount of speed you can have, and I think speed-wise, last year was the ecosystem was really maxed out. I don't think we could have gone a lot faster.
Yeah.
So that's definitely the good news. If you look at the global situation, the VC funding has been massive last year globally.
Yeah.
But if you take global figures, I think it's only grown 96 or 95%, right, at global level. So year on year, almost basically the total amount of funding in 2021 was almost double as in 2020 at global level. Now in Africa, it was 2.5 times. So a lot more.
Of goods, yeah.
That's the good news. Then the second thing to keep in mind as well is the age of the ecosystem. If you want to compare it with Silicon Valley or Europe or even Southeast Asia and so on, you need to see when as the first couple of startups started to raise funding in these markets, and how many years down the line are we now? Africa is very, the ecosystem in Africa is really recent. 10 years ago, there were just maybe a couple of players really. handful of them, maybe InterSwitch and a couple more. I mean, it's really recent. So it does take time. And what's interesting is that if you look at there's somebody in the ecosystem who did this analysis. I forgot where it's at, but there was somebody who compared Africa and Southeast Asian ecosystem and like the trajectory. So if you look, okay, when was the year Southeast Asian startups raised say 1.7 billion or 2 billion, and then what was the following year? And the following year was less than 4.3, right? So yes, it was 3, 4, 5 years ago, but like the trajectory was actually slower. So I think this is very, very promising. Yes, we could say it's a drop in the ocean of global VC funding, but the size of this drop has like exploded in the past year, and so the trajectory is promising. And I think it's not really relevant to compare absolute values in that sense with other ecosystems. I think it's more interesting to put things in perspective, either by sort of backtracking in time or by looking at year-on-year growth stuff. So yeah, another thing that is interesting, and actually we'll publish a post on this tomorrow. In our newsletter of tomorrow is to look at the funding per capita per country, right? So instead of looking at things overall as a continent, it's to look at a country level. And you have a couple of markets like Nigeria, like Kenya, like South Africa, like Egypt, that have amount of funding per capita that is very decent compared to Southeast Asian countries or Latin America countries. So that I think is interesting to look at.
Thank you very much, Maxime, for that very robust answer. So let me start this next question by congratulating you on Africa, the big deal. I hope you guys do very great things. So talking about big deals, unicorns are really big deals, okay? And we've got about 959 of them in the world. Okay, out of that, Africa has about 7 or 8. I think 290 of those unicorns were made last year, and I think Africa has about 2. Made about 2 of those. An ecosystem like Latin America has, I think some reports say 16, some reports say 34. Okay, and unicorns here, of course, are big deals. Do you think Africa has a fair share of the amount of unicorns as it's here presently, or do you think that the government could have done better, or should be doing better than 7 or 8?
Yeah. I mean, again, I think it's very much, I'm going to give you very much the same answer as the previous questions, which is like, it takes time to reach unicorn level, number one. Number two, you need to compare apples with apples. You don't do the same thing with $1 million in Nigeria than what you do with $1 million in California or Vietnam or so on. So I think it's a little bit, this concept of like $1 billion valuation, makes sense if you're looking at it within a given ecosystem where things are comparable, like on a macro level. Otherwise, I think it's a little bit artificial because, if you at the end of the day, what are people, what are startups doing with money they raise is hiring talents mainly, especially, in tech, it's mainly, most of the funding, especially in software companies, goes to talents. Well, you can, with $1 million in California, you don't get the same amount of talents as in Nigeria, and so, it doesn't make much sense to compare that, because you would need a lot more funding in California to recruit the same team size as in Nigeria and the same great talents as in Nigeria. So does it make sense to compare the number of unicorns? I don't think so. It would be more interesting to look at the within the ecosystem in Africa, how many unicorns, how many companies have reached unicorn status this year compared to 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and that makes some kind of sense. We can see how things are evolving, or we can compare within Africa. I don't know, Nigeria versus South Africa versus Egypt. That could, to some extent, make some sense. But comparing it with Mexico or the US doesn't do that much. The second thing is also, it takes time to build companies that big. And again, the ecosystem is fairly small. So if you look at companies that have reached unicorn status this year, the cheaper cash and so on, it took a number of years. And so you're not necessarily, if you want to see how many unicorns we'll have in Africa in 10 years, look at the number of pre-seed companies that we have this year. I think that's really what I'm more excited with. I'm a lot more excited to see a lot of pre-seed than to see a couple of companies reaching unicorn status. It's great, but these very large companies are, already scale ups, and they're already there. If you don't have companies at pre-seed and seed stage, then the future is not looking great. So that I think is really what's really good about this year funding, is that you get a lot more companies raising a lot more money. So yeah, it's not just the same names. I remember very well 5-6 years ago when I started working in this space. You would talk with another investor and you would look at your respective deal flows, and it was basically the same. We were all talking to the same companies all the time. Nowadays, it's every day that we discover a new company in the continent, and that's fantastic. That for me is the real good news of 2021. It's the number of companies that you see emerging. You hear about them joining YC, joining Techstars, raising pre-seed from the likes of Keppel or Launch Africa, and all these the pre-seed investors or future Africa funds. That's really what's really exciting is to see all these very very early stage companies, and that's something that we should keep an eye on.
Thank you very much for that. Very very explanatory response. Okay, so let's go into funding and the kind of emotion that it attracts. So startups raise funding in Africa, people are excited, people are happy, but we all know that funding is not a reward for whatever you've done. It's actually an invitation for more work. Okay, so but what do you think? Do you think it's reasonable to celebrate for funding, and why do you think startups do that?
Yeah, no, I hear you. I mean, clearly it's internally within the startup, you should rejoice probably more when you reach your first, $10,000 GMV or revenue than when you raise your first $1 million, because the investor, your customers are your first investors to some extent. And if you actually don't need to raise funding and you can scale without it and scale super fast, then it's great. There are companies that are able to scale without raising funding, so that's really good. Now, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't celebrate when there is funding raised. In my view, VC funding is not what allows companies to be built. It's what allows tech companies to scale fast. Right? Maybe a number of these companies would have grown regardless of VC funding, but maybe it would have taken them 10 years instead of 2. Yeah. So that's what VC funding comes in. And the great stuff is that it means really that what we were discussing earlier, it means the ecosystem is really catching up and accelerating. So that's why it's a good news. The other thing is that data on revenue and GMV and EBITDA is very rarely disclosed, so we don't get a chance to celebrate that. What we can celebrate is that as an external observer of the ecosystem, the only thing you can see is those deals that are being signed to assess, some kind of success metrics for a startup. If a startup has raised $1 million, it doesn't mean they are a fantastic startup, but it's the closest proxy we have to that.
The validation.
As external observers. It does mean that investors who have had access to the financials of the company, who've looked at the financials in detail, who have talked with the team, who have really assessed and who have really done due diligence and so on, have said, okay, I'm happy to put my money on this. And they have done a lot. Those we're talking about seasoned investors and so on. So it does mean that this, it's not wrong to say that fundraising deals are a good proxy for the quality of a startup and a team and the performance of the startup. So yeah, I do think it's a good thing to celebrate. But as you said very rightly, fundraising is a milestone. It's not the end goal. From an investor perspective, we should maybe celebrate even more. But we are. I remember when it was the Paystack deal, everybody celebrated. For a couple of weeks. So this is already. But we need definitely to celebrate more exits. But again, the challenge with exit is that we don't necessarily always know what's behind it. Sometimes we see a startup being acquired, and then when you talk with the founders, under the radar, you realize that they didn't sell the company too well, and it was more like a low exits, and so that's a little bit also why maybe we celebrate exits less when we don't have the details of the deal. But yeah, I think it's good, and I think startups should share it when they're expanding. It's building up the credibility on the ecosystem, and I think it's also doing something that we tend to undermine is the effect this has on the future generations of entrepreneurs, right? When you read Elon Musk raising a huge amount of money and sending rockets and so on, this is great, but if you are a university student in Lagos University, you might just think, I will never do that. I will never be that. This is just a completely different world. Yeah. But when you hear someone in Lagos raising huge amount of money, like the guys at Paystack or other startups in the ecosystem, then you're like, okay, I know someone who know that person. That's not that far. That could be me one day. This role model thing is really important. And I think we should not underestimate it. So I really encourage startups to share it and celebrate it moderately. Because it's also hard. I mean, it takes 6 months, 9 months, a year, sometimes more to raise funding. When you get it done, you should give yourself a pat in the back. It's tough. It's tougher in Africa than anywhere else to raise funding still today. So. Let's not forget that and still celebrate.
Oh, thank you very much for that. So this is my final question. Okay, so what would be your best advice to startups that are looking to secure venture funding in the year, and what are your expectations generally in the African venture funding space for the year?
As I said, it takes time. So. Start early if you want to. If you need to fundraise. Again, you don't necessarily need to, as we said earlier. It's not an end goal. I've put here a couple of tips actually in a blog post a couple of months ago. So I'm sharing that with you.
I saw it.
These are still very much valid. We shared that with Catalyst Fund. But yeah, so it does take time to anticipate it, and I think I would also tell them, do your homework. There's a lot more investors now in the ecosystem. There's over 800 investors that signed checks to startups in 2021 in Africa. this is a big number. And you know, the good news is that we know who they are. We have data on this. It's all there. We know who they are. We know where they're based. We know which startups they invested in, what ticket size they do, and so on. We have all this information. So do your homework. There's no point for you to reach out to, I don't know, Partech, if what you're doing is pre-seed. Because I mean, you can always talk to them, and it's good for them to have you on their radar and so on. But they will not sign you a check now. So you know, do your homework as well. And also, you know, the same way investors are doing due diligence on startups, startups should also do due diligence on investors. And again, you know, we're happy with Africa the Big Deal to bring data for startups and entrepreneurs to check this information and to do their own due diligence. Because once you know which investors you want to, you know, that could be a fit for you, you can also check which startups invested in and talk to these startups. You know, are those good investors to have on board? You know, are they helping you? Are they providing the value they claim they provide? You can really check and then make a decision. And hopefully you're in a position to say no to some
investors.
Go to the best one. So yeah, that's what I'd say. And they can always access the database. I shouldn't say that too loud, but I'm always happy to share discounts with the startups if they want to access my database. I mean, the Africa Big, I've put the link to you. Right now it's a subscription model. It's around $10 per month, but where you get all the deals each month. But for startups, if they drop me a note on LinkedIn or Twitter, I'll be more than happy. If they are entrepreneurs in Africa, I'll be more than happy to give them a big discount. So
no problem. I see the links. I've already bookmarked them. So thank you very much for sharing them. And thank you very much for this time, Maxime. It's been a very elucidating one. It's been an eye opener, and I'm very happy we had this session. So thank you very much again.
No, thank you. Thank you for these good questions. It was fun to talk to you, and looking forward to hear more from your side.
Yeah, definitely. From this side too. Thank you very much. I hope to chat with you more later. So just take care and have a very lovely week.
Thank you. You too. Bye bye.
Yeah. Bye.